She sacrificed her whole empire for a man she barely knew, and he almost destroyed her for it. One satisficed. Let me start over and write this properly. Hook. She built a satisficed empire from nothing, and satisficed. I apologize. Let me write this cleanly from the top. Hook. She built $1 billion empire from nothing, and one man nearly burned it all to the ground. Not a competitor, not a stranger. Her own stepbrother. The person she once trusted with her life. Exposed on live television, dragged through lawsuits, and publicly humiliated, Vanessa Sterling had every reason to give up. But the night she showed up at a stranger's doorstep in a wedding dress, she wasn't surrendering. She was making the most desperate gamble of her life. And the man standing on the other side of that door? A broke, exhausted single father who had absolutely no idea what he was about to walk into. If you want to see how this impossible story unfolds, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that turned the roads outside Macon, Georgia, into rivers of mud and headlights. Ethan Cole sat in his truck in the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, engine off, wipers still, staring at the fogged-up windshield while his phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He didn't pick it up. He already knew what the message said. His mother had sent a variation of the same text every Tuesday night for the past 4 months. Just checking in on my favorite granddaughter. How's Lily? How are you? He never knew how to answer the second question. Ethan was 32 years old, 6'1", with dark circles under his eyes that had become so permanent they looked like bruises. He worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in downtown Macon. The kind of job that sounded impressive at dinner parties, but paid just enough to keep the lights on and Lily in a decent school. His hands were rough from years of site work, and his shoulders carried the posture of a man who hadn't slept a full night in years. Not since Sarah left. He didn't like to think about that. Didn't like the word abandoned, even though that's exactly what it was. Sarah had walked out when Lily was 3, left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." No forwarding address, no custody fight, just gone, like smoke from a candle someone forgot to blow out. That was 4 years ago. Lily was 7 now, a fierce little girl with tangled brown hair and her father's stubborn jaw. She asked about her mother sometimes, less often than she used to, and Ethan had learned to answer those questions without his voice breaking, most of the time. He rubbed his eyes, pulled the keys from the ignition, and stepped out into the rain. Rosie's Diner sat at the edge of a 2-lane highway about 20 minutes south of downtown, a squat brick building with a neon sign that had been flickering since before Ethan was born. The place smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease and old vinyl booths, and it was the only restaurant within 30 miles that stayed open past midnight. Ethan came here when the apartment walls started closing in, when Lily was asleep at his mother's house, and when the silence became louder than he could stand. He pushed through the glass door, shaking rain from his jacket, and slid into his usual booth near the back. The waitress, a woman named Darlene who had to be pushing 70 and had never once smiled at him, brought coffee without being asked. "You look like hell," she said. "Thanks, Darlene." That wasn't a compliment. "I know." She shuffled away and Ethan wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into his cold fingers. The diner was nearly empty. A truck driver sat at the counter eating pie. A young couple whispered in a corner booth, their faces lit blue by a shared phone screen. The jukebox in the corner played something old and sad that Ethan didn't recognize. He was halfway through his second cup when the door opened again. The woman who walked in was soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her face, wearing a long coat that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. She stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room with the sharp, calculating gaze of someone who was used to being in control of every situation she entered, and who was currently not in control of anything at all. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from the rain. She walked to the counter, sat down 2 stools from the truck driver, and ordered black coffee in a voice that was steady but thin, like a wire pulled too tight. Ethan wouldn't have recognized her if she hadn't turned her head at exactly the wrong angle. catching the overhead light in a way that illuminated the sharp line of her jaw and the small scar just below her left ear. A scar he remembered from a lifetime ago. Vanessa. The name left his mouth before he could stop it, and she froze. Her shoulders went rigid. She turned slowly, and when their eyes met, something flickered across her face. Surprise, then recognition, then something harder to name, something close to embarrassment. Ethan Cole, she said quietly. Of all the places. They had known each other in college, back at Georgia Tech, though known was a generous word. They'd shared an introductory economics class, sat 3 rows apart, and spoken exactly twice. Once when she asked to borrow a pen, and once at a party where they'd argued about something stupid that Ethan couldn't even remember now. She'd been intense even then, a business major with an edge to her that made most people uncomfortable. Smart in a way that wasn't warm. Ambitious in a way that didn't apologize. After college, Ethan had heard things. Everyone had. Vanessa Sterling had become one of those names that floated through alumni newsletters and local business magazines. The girl from a modest family in Savannah who had built a hospitality empire before she turned 30. The details were always vague and slightly unbelievable. Something about inheriting a struggling bed and breakfast from her late father and transforming it deal by deal into a luxury resort that drew guests from across the Southeast. The kind of story that sounded inspiring in a magazine and exhausting in real life. "Can I sit?" Ethan asked, already standing. She hesitated, and he watched her weigh the options, the polite refusal, the forced smile, the excuse about needing to leave soon. He saw all of it cross her face in the span of 2 seconds. "Sure," she said, and moved her coffee cup an inch to the left, as if making room for him at a counter that had 15 empty stools. They talked. Slowly at first, the way people do when they haven't seen each other in a decade and aren't sure if they actually like each other. Ethan told her about Lily, about the engineering firm, about the apartment with the leaking kitchen faucet he kept meaning to fix. He kept it light. He didn't mention Sarah. He didn't mention the loneliness that sometimes hit him so hard at 3 a.m. that he'd sit on the kitchen floor and just breathe. Vanessa listened with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, like she was filing everything away for later use. She told him about the resort, the Belmont, she called it, a historic property about 40 minutes north, near Lake Sinclair. She described it in a way that was careful, almost rehearsed, and Ethan got the distinct impression she was leaving out more than she was putting in. "So you're running a luxury resort," Ethan said. That's incredible." "It's a building," she said flatly, "with a lot of expensive plumbing and a tax bill that would make you physically ill." He laughed. She didn't. "I'm serious," she said. "People hear billionaire, and they think champagne and private jets. You know what my last Tuesday looked like? I sat in a conference room for 9 hours arguing with 3 lawyers about a zoning variance while my stepbrother's legal team filed another injunction to freeze my operating accounts." She took a sip of coffee. "So, yeah, incredible." Ethan studied her face. She was beautiful, not in the soft, approachable way that magazines liked, but in the sharp, angular way that made people look twice and then look away. High cheekbones, dark eyes that gave nothing away, and a mouth that seemed designed for saying things people didn't want to hear. But underneath the composure, there was something frayed, worn, like she'd been holding the same pose for so long that the muscles had started to shake. "Who's the stepbrother?" Ethan asked. Her jaw tightened. "Marcus Webb." "Should I know that name?" "Depends on how closely you follow real estate litigation in central Georgia." A pause. "He's my father's second wife's son. After my father died, his mother tried to claim half the estate. Lost. Badly. Marcus never forgave me for it. He spent the last 5 years trying to take what the courts wouldn't give him." "Take it how?" Vanessa set down her coffee cup and stared at it for a long moment. "Every way you can think of. Lawsuits, board manipulation." He got himself appointed to the County Planning Commission last year and immediately started challenging every permit the Belmont has. He's got investors whispering that I'm over-leveraged. He's got a forensic accountant going through my books with a microscope. She paused. "Last month, he convinced 2 of my biggest lenders to accelerate their loan terms." Ethan frowned. "Can they do that?" "If they have cause. And Marcus is very good at manufacturing cause." The rain hammered against the diner's windows. Darlene refilled their coffees without a word. "What do the lawyers say?" Ethan asked. Vanessa's smile was thin and bitter. "The lawyers say I need stability. That's the word they keep using. Financial stability, operational stability, personal stability." She said the last two words with a contempt that surprised him. "The bank turned down my refinancing application last week. You know what the loan officer actually said to me? He said, 'Ms. Sterling, we need to see evidence of a stable personal life, a solid foundation.' He was looking at my left hand when he said it." Ethan blinked. "He wanted you to be married. He wanted me to look like I wasn't a flight risk. Apparently, a single woman running a $100 million operation makes bankers nervous. If I were a man, they'd call me focused. Since I'm not, they call me unstable." "That's insane." "That's Georgia." They sat in silence for a moment. Ethan turned his coffee mug in slow circles on the counter, watching the dark liquid swirl. He was thinking about his own conversations with bank officers, the polite smiles, the careful questions about his family situation when he'd applied for a home loan 2 years ago. The subtle implication that a single father might not be the most reliable investment. "You know what your problem is?" Ethan said, and immediately regretted the phrasing. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Please enlighten me." "You need a husband, not a real one, just one on paper. Someone boring and stable and employed who shows up to the meetings and shakes hands and makes the bankers feel comfortable." He shrugged. "It's ridiculous, but it'd probably work." "Are you offering?" He laughed. "I'm a broke structural engineer with a 7-year-old and a truck that stalls in the rain. I'm not exactly what the banks are looking for." "You're exactly what they're looking for," Vanessa said quietly. "That's the whole point." The way she said it made something in Ethan's chest tighten. Not attraction, exactly. Something more unsettling. Recognition. The look on her face was one he'd seen in his own mirror. The look of someone who was running out of options and trying very hard not to let anyone see it. "I was kidding," he said. "I know." "Good. Good." They finished their coffee, exchanged phone numbers with the awkward formality of people who didn't expect to use them, and went their separate ways into the rain. Ethan drove home with the heater blasting, his wet jacket thrown across the back seat, thinking about Vanessa Sterling and the way her voice had cracked, just barely, when she said the word unstable. He forgot about it by Thursday. The next 2 weeks passed the way they always did, in a blur of alarm clocks, packed lunches, client meetings, and bedtime stories. Lily was in 2nd grade at Westfield Elementary, a cheerful, chaotic school that sent home more permission slips than Ethan could keep track of. She was a good kid, funny, stubborn, with a habit of asking questions that no 7-year-old should be capable of forming. "Dad, why do you always look tired?" "Because I am tired, Bug." "Why?" "Because grown-ups are always tired." "That's dumb." "Yeah, it kind of is." She was the center of his world, and he built his entire life around her schedule. Drop off at 7:45, pick up at 3:15, homework at the kitchen table, dinner at 6, bath at 7:30, stories until 8. The routine was iron, and Ethan clung to it the way a drowning man clings to a piece of driftwood. It was the only thing keeping him from sinking. His job was fine. Not great, not terrible, so fine. The firm, Hargrove and Associates, handled mostly commercial projects, strip malls, parking garages, the occasional county building renovation. Ethan was good at his work, meticulous and careful, but he'd been passed over for promotion twice in the last 3 years. His boss, a thick-necked man named Bill Hargrove, who thought leadership meant speaking loudly, had once told him, "You're a hell of an engineer, Cole, but you're not hungry enough." Ethan had wanted to say, "I'm plenty hungry. I'm just too tired to fight about it." But he'd kept his mouth shut, the way he always did. It was a Friday afternoon, and Ethan was sitting at his desk reviewing a foundation analysis for a new office complex when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I need to talk to you. It's Vanessa." He stared at it for a long time. Then he typed back, "About what?" The response came instantly. "About what you said at the diner." "I said a lot of things." "You said I needed a husband." Ethan's stomach dropped. He typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, I was joking. I know. Can we still talk? He agreed to meet her the following evening at a coffee shop downtown, a small place with exposed brick walls and uncomfortable wooden chairs that charged $6 for a latte. Vanessa was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with a laptop open in front of her and a thick folder of documents that she closed when she saw him approach. She looked different than she had at the diner. More composed, more deliberate. She was wearing a dark blazer over a simple white shirt, her hair pulled back, her face arranged in the careful neutrality of someone about to make a business pitch. "Before you say anything," she started, "I want you to know that I've thought about this for 2 weeks. I've run every other option. I've talked to 4 different attorneys. I've explored bridge financing, silent investors, holding company restructures, and a leveraged buyout of my own resort that would have given me less than 40% equity." She paused. "This is the last idea I have." "What exactly are we talking about?" Ethan asked, even though he already knew. "A marriage, temporary, contractual, purely strategic." She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "I had my attorney draft this. It's a prenuptial agreement with a built-in dissolution clause. We marry, maintain the appearance for 12 to 18 months, long enough to satisfy the banks and undercut Marcus's narrative that I'm unstable, and then we quietly divorce. You receive $200,000 paid in installments, plus full health insurance for you and Lily during the arrangement." Ethan didn't touch the document. He looked at Vanessa's face instead, searching for something. A crack in the composure, a hint that she understood how insane this sounded. He found it in her hands. They were trembling, just slightly, beneath the table. "You're serious," he said. "I don't have the luxury of not being serious." "Vanessa, we barely know each other." "I know. That's actually an advantage. There's no emotional complication, no history to manage. It's clean." "Clean." Ethan sat back in his chair. "You want me to marry you, a woman I've spoken to maybe 4 times in my life, move into your resort, bring my daughter into this, and pretend to be your husband for a year and a half. And you're calling that clean?" Something shifted in her expression. The composure flickered, and underneath it, he saw the same thing he'd seen at the diner scene: exhaustion. Raw, bone-deep exhaustion. "I'm calling it survival," she said quietly. "Marcus filed a new motion last week. He's petitioning the court to appoint a conservator over the Belmont's finances. If he gets it, I lose operational control. Not ownership, not yet, but control. He'll install his own people, bleed the resort dry through consulting fees and management contracts, and within 2 years the property will be worthless enough for him to buy it at a fraction of its value." She swallowed. "That resort is the only thing my father left me. The only thing. And I'm not going to let Marcus Webb take it because some bank officer thinks I need a man standing next to me to be taken seriously." The anger in her voice was real, and Ethan respected it even as it made him uneasy. He picked up the document and skimmed the first page. It was dense with legal language, professionally formatted, and thorough in a way that suggested Vanessa's attorney charged by the comma. "I have a daughter," Ethan said. "She's 7. She doesn't understand legal arrangements or strategic marriages. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, she's going to think it's real. She's going to get attached." "I know." "Do you? Because Lily's already lost one mother. I'm not putting her through that again." Vanessa flinched. It was small, barely visible, but Ethan caught it. She looked down at her hands. I'm not going to hurt your daughter, Ethan. I'm asking for your help, not trying to create collateral damage." Those might end up being the same thing. The silence between them stretched, filled with the sound of the espresso machine and murmured conversations from other tables. Ethan read 3 more pages of the prenuptial agreement, his engineer's brain automatically cataloging terms, conditions, and exit clauses. It was generous, absurdly generous. The financial terms alone would solve problems he'd been losing sleep over for years. "I need time," he said. "How much?" "A week." "I might not have a week." "Then I need as much time as you can give me." Vanessa nodded slowly. 3 days. He took the document home and read it twice more after putting Lily to bed. He sat at the kitchen table with a cold beer and a highlighter, marking clauses and making notes in the margins the way he'd mark up a construction blueprint. The agreement was solid, airtight even. Vanessa's attorney had anticipated almost every contingency: living arrangements, public appearances, media inquiries, financial obligations, and the conditions under which the marriage could be dissolved. But there was no clause for what happened when a 7-year-old girl started calling a stranger Mom. He called his mother the next morning. Helen Cole was 61 years old, a retired school nurse who lived 20 minutes away and watched Lily every Tuesday and Thursday after school. She was practical, opinionated, and had never once told Ethan how to live his life, which was probably why he always called her when he needed to be told how to live his life. "Let me get this straight," Helen said. "A billionaire you met once in college wants to pay you $200,000 to pretend to be her husband." "That's the summary, yeah. And you're considering it." "I'm thinking about it." Ethan Michael Cole, Mom. "Do you hear yourself? I know how it sounds. It sounds like the plot of a bad movie, the kind I'd watch on a Sunday afternoon and then feel embarrassed about." Ethan laughed despite himself. "It's more complicated than that." "It always is." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about her. Not the money, not the legal situation. Tell me about her." Ethan thought about Vanessa sitting at the diner counter with red-rimmed eyes, about the trembling hands under the table at the coffee shop, about the way her voice had changed when she talked about her father's resort, not with pride, but with something fiercer, protectiveness. "She's scared," he said. "She won't admit it, but she's scared, and she's alone. I don't think she has anyone." "And you want to help her?" "I think I do, yeah." "Because of the money?" "Partly, but not mostly." Helen sighed. "You've always been like this, even as a boy. Remember the stray cat you brought home when you were 9, the one that scratched you so badly you needed a tetanus shot?" "Mr. Whiskers. That cat hated you, Ethan, hated everything, and you fed it every day for 3 years. What's your point, Mom?" "My point is that you've always had a weakness for things that bite. Just make sure this one doesn't bite Lily." He called Vanessa on the second day. "I have conditions," he said. "Go ahead. First, Lily comes first, always. Not the resort, not the banks, not the legal strategy. If at any point this starts hurting her, we're done. No negotiation." "Agreed." "Second, I'm not going to lie to my daughter. She's too smart and she's been through too much. I'll tell her that you and I are getting married and that you're going to be part of our family. I won't use the word fake. I won't use the word temporary. But I'm also not going to promise her something I can't deliver." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "That's fair." "Third, I keep my job. I'll move to the resort. I'll show up to whatever events you need me at, but I'm not quitting my career to be a prop." "I wouldn't ask you to." "And fourth, when this is over, however it ends, you don't just disappear from Lily's life. If she gets attached to you, and she will, because that's who she is, you don't just vanish. You handle it like an adult. You explain. You stay in touch. You don't do what her mother did." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Ethan thought the call had dropped. "Vanessa?" "I'm here." Her voice was thick. "I agree to all 4 conditions. I'll have the attorney amend the agreement." "Okay." "Okay?" "Yeah, okay. Let's do this." They were married 11 days later at the Bibb County Courthouse, on a Tuesday morning, in a room that smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. Vanessa wore a navy blue dress, tasteful, expensive, and wrong. Ethan wore the same suit he'd worn to his firm's Christmas party, which was slightly too tight across the shoulders because he'd bought it 3 years ago and hadn't tried it on since. Lily wore her favorite yellow dress with the sunflowers on it and held a bouquet of dandelions she'd picked from the parking lot. The ceremony took 7 minutes. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, said the words in a tone that suggested she had somewhere else to be. There were no guests, no music, no tears. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan and Vanessa looked at each other with the mutual panic of 2 people who hadn't discussed this part. Vanessa leaned in and pressed her lips to his cheek, quick, dry, businesslike. Lily clapped. Are you married now? Lily asked. We are, Ethan said. Is Vanessa my mom now? The question landed like a grenade in a silent room. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at Vanessa, who looked at Lily, who looked up at both of them with the devastating earnestness that only a 7-year-old can produce. Vanessa started and stopped. She knelt down so she was eye level with Lily, her expensive dress pressing against the courthouse floor. I'm going to be living with you and your dad, and I'm going to take care of you. Is that okay? Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Do you like pancakes? Yes, I like pancakes. The chocolate chip kind? Especially the chocolate chip kind. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied. Okay, you can stay. Ethan watched Vanessa's face as she stood up, and for the first time he saw something he hadn't expected. Not composure, not calculation, not the careful mask of a woman who controlled a $100 million empire. He saw something vulnerable and unguarded and almost painful in its tenderness. She looked at Lily the way someone looks at a door they've been afraid to open. The move to the Belmont happened 3 days later. Ethan had expected luxury. Vanessa was a billionaire, after all. But he hadn't expected to feel so completely out of place that he wanted to turn around and drive back to his apartment before he'd even parked the truck. The Belmont sat on 60 acres of rolling Georgia countryside overlooking Lake Sinclair, a sprawling white-columned estate that had been built in 1892 as a private residence for a cotton magnate and converted to a hotel in the 1940s. Vanessa had bought it 6 years ago, when it was a deteriorating relic with bad wiring and a leaking roof, and transformed it into something that magazines described with words like breathtaking and impeccable. The main building alone had 42 guest rooms, a grand ballroom, 2 restaurants, a spa, and a library with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lake. Vanessa's private quarters occupied the entire 3rd floor of the East Wing, a sprawling apartment with hardwood floors, 12-foot ceilings, and the kind of minimalist furniture that made Ethan afraid to sit down. This is where we live? Lily said, pressing her face against a window that overlooked the formal gardens. This is where we live, Ethan confirmed, setting down a box of Lily's stuffed animals on a leather couch that probably cost more than his car. It smells weird. It smells like money, Bug. I don't like it. Ethan didn't either, but he didn't say so. The first week was an exercise in controlled chaos. Ethan commuted to his office in Macon every morning, a 45-minute drive that gave him time to wonder what he'd gotten himself into. Lily started taking a school bus from a stop near the resort's entrance, which she thought was exciting and Ethan thought was one more thing that could go wrong. Vanessa was barely present. She left before dawn and returned after dark, moving through the apartment like a ghost in expensive shoes, her phone permanently attached to her ear, her face set in the tight-jawed expression of a woman fighting a war on 12 fronts. They didn't eat together. They didn't talk, except in brief transactional exchanges about schedules and logistics. The marriage, such as it was, felt exactly like what it was. A business arrangement between 2 strangers who shared a roof and nothing else. It was Lily who broke through first. On the 4th night, Ethan was in the kitchen of the apartment, a gleaming professional-grade space that he was fairly sure Vanessa had never actually used, making grilled cheese sandwiches. Lily was at the counter doing homework, her tongue poking out in concentration. Vanessa walked in at 8:30, still in her work clothes, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped when she saw them. For a second, she stood in the doorway with an expression that Ethan couldn't read. Surprise, maybe, or something older and sadder. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked. No, I had something at the office." "Vanessa, you didn't eat at the office. I can tell because you're looking at that grilled cheese like it owes you money." A pause, the tiniest crack in the armor. "I might be a little hungry," she admitted. "Sit down." She sat at the counter next to Lily, stiffly, like a guest in her own home. Ethan put a plate in front of her. Grilled cheese on sourdough, slightly burnt on one side, the way he always made it because he always got distracted. Vanessa picked it up, took a bite, and chewed slowly. "This is terrible," she said. "I know. The cheese isn't even fully melted." "I know." It's the best thing I've eaten in 3 days. She ate the whole thing, and then she ate half of another one. And when Lily asked her to help with a math worksheet, she pulled the paper toward her and bent her head next to Lily's with a focus that seemed completely disproportionate to the task of subtracting 17 from 43. Ethan watched from the sink, his hands in soapy water, and thought, this is either the smartest thing I've ever done or the worst. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan found Vanessa sitting on the balcony overlooking the lake, her shoes off, her feet bare against the stone railing. The moonlight caught the water and turned it silver. "You okay?" he asked. "Marcus filed another motion today. He's claiming the marriage is fraudulent." Ethan's stomach clenched. "Already?" "He has people watching me. He probably knew about the courthouse before the ink was dry." She paused. "His lawyers are arguing that the marriage is a sham designed to manipulate financial institutions. If a judge agrees, it doesn't just invalidate our arrangement. It opens me up to fraud charges." "Can he prove it?" Vanessa looked at him. "Can he prove that two people who barely know each other got married 11 days after reconnecting at a diner, moved in together at a luxury resort, and sleep in separate bedrooms?" "Yeah, Ethan, he can probably prove it." The words hung in the air between them. The crickets screamed in the darkness below. "So what do we do?" Ethan asked. "We make it real," Vanessa said. "Or at least we make it look real enough that no judge in Bibb County would question it. We go to events together. We post on social media. We hold hands in public and eat dinner at restaurants where people can see us. We become the couple that everyone in this county believes we are." "And the separate bedrooms?" "We keep them, but we don't advertise it." Ethan leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the lake. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a frog was making a sound like a broken spring. "There's something I should tell you," he said, "about why I agreed to this." "The money." "No, I mean, yes, the money helps, obviously, but that's not—" He stopped, searching for words that didn't sound stupid. "Lily hasn't had a stable home in 4 years. I've been moving us from apartment to apartment, always behind on rent, always one bad month away from having to move again. She changes schools, she loses friends, and she pretends she's fine because she knows I'm pretending I'm fine." He paused. "When you showed me the prenup and I saw the financial terms, I didn't think about myself. I thought about Lily having a real room, a place to come home to that didn't change every 9 months. That's why I said yes." Vanessa was quiet for a long time. "My father died when I was 24, she said eventually. "Heart attack, no warning. One day he was there, complaining about the plumbing in the old house, and the next day he was gone. He left me the Belmont, not the resort it is now, just the building. A broken, leaking, 100-year-old building that everyone told me to sell." She paused. "His second wife, Diane, Marcus's mother, she tried to take it in probate. She said my father promised it to both of us. He didn't. I had the will, but she dragged it through the courts for 2 years, and by the time I won, I was broke, completely broke. I rebuilt everything from that." She gestured vaguely at the resort below them. "Every wall, every room, every chandelier. I rebuilt it with my own money, my own credit, my own sleepless nights. And Marcus watched me do it, and he hated me for it, because every success I had was proof that his mother's claim was wrong. That's a hell of a grudge. It's not a grudge, it's a campaign. Marcus doesn't want the resort because he loves it. He wants it because I love it. He wants to take the one thing that matters to me, the one thing my father gave me, and watch me lose it." Her voice was steady, but her hands were gripping the railing hard enough to turn her knuckles white. "He's not going to take it," Ethan said. "You don't know that." "No, but I know buildings. I know foundations. And the foundation of everything Marcus is doing is a lie. That you're unstable, that you can't be trusted, that you're going to crack under pressure. We just have to prove he's wrong." Vanessa looked at him. In the moonlight, her eyes were dark and unreadable, but her grip on the railing loosened, just slightly. "You really believe that?" "I'm an engineer. I believe in structural integrity. And from what I can see, your structure is a lot stronger than Marcus thinks it is." She didn't smile. But something in her face softened, and she nodded once, and they stood together on the balcony in silence, listening to the frogs and the wind and the distant sound of the lake moving against the shore. It was the first time they'd been in the same room for more than 10 minutes, without talking about schedules or legal strategy. It was the first moment that felt, however briefly, like something other than a transaction. And somewhere in the back of Ethan's mind, a voice that sounded a lot like his mother's said, "Be careful, boy, this one bites." He didn't listen. He never did. The first audit arrived on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the wedding. Ethan was halfway through his commute, stuck behind a logging truck on the 2-lane highway, when Vanessa called. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how he was. She said, "They're here," and the flatness in her voice told him everything he needed to know. "Who's there?" "State revenue auditors, 3 of them. They showed up at 9 o'clock with a court order and 4 boxes of document requests. Marcus filed a complaint alleging financial irregularities in the Belmont's tax filings going back 3 years. Ethan pulled onto the shoulder and put the truck in park. "Are there irregularities?" "No, but it doesn't matter. The audit itself is the weapon. My staff is panicking. My guests are watching suited strangers carry boxes through the lobby, and by tonight, someone will leak it to the press. Marcus doesn't need to find anything. He just needs people to think there's something to find." "What do you need me to do?" A pause. He could hear her breathing, controlled and deliberate, the way someone breathes when they're trying not to scream. "I need you to come home." It was the first time she'd called the Belmont home in reference to both of them, and Ethan noticed it even if she didn't. He called his office, told Bill Hargrove he had a family emergency, which wasn't technically a lie, and turned the truck around. By the time he arrived, the lobby of the Belmont looked like a crime scene without the tape. 3 auditors in dark suits sat at a conference table in the business center, surrounded by stacks of financial records. Vanessa's operations manager, a sharp woman in her 50s named Gloria Chen, was ferrying documents back and forth with the grim efficiency of someone who'd survived corporate disasters before. The front desk staff kept glancing toward the business center with the nervous energy of rabbits who'd spotted a hawk. Ethan found Vanessa in her office on the 2nd floor, standing behind her desk with her arms crossed and her phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to her attorney, a man named David Reeves, whose hourly rate, Ethan had learned, was roughly equivalent to Ethan's daily salary. "I don't care what the filing says, David. The books are clean." "You know they're clean. I need you to manage this before it becomes a headline." She listened for a moment, her jaw tightening. "Then find a way to manage it faster." She hung up and looked at Ethan. For a second, the mask dropped, and he saw the raw fear underneath. Not the calculated composure she wore in meetings or the dry sarcasm she deployed like armor, but actual fear. The kind that lives in the stomach and makes food taste like ash. "Tell me what to do," Ethan said. "There's nothing to do. The auditors have their court order, we cooperate, we provide everything they ask for, and we wait. That's not a strategy, that's just hoping. Welcome to my life." Ethan sat down in the chair across from her desk. He'd spent enough time on construction sites to know that when a building was under stress, you didn't just watch and hope. You identified the load-bearing points and reinforced them. The legal fight was beyond his expertise, but the human side wasn't. "Your staff is scared," he said. "Gloria looks like she hasn't slept. Your front desk people are whispering to each other, and at least 2 of your guests have noticed the suits in the business center. You need to get ahead of this before the rumors start." Vanessa blinked. "Get ahead of it how?" "Talk to your people. All of them. Not an email, not a memo. Stand in front of them and tell them what's happening. Tell them the audit is routine, that the books are clean, that Marcus is playing games and you're not afraid of the scrutiny, even if you are afraid, especially if you are afraid." "I don't do speeches, Ethan. You don't do grilled cheese either, but you ate 2 of them last week." The joke landed wrong. Too light for the moment, and Ethan saw it in her face. But then something shifted, a flicker of something that wasn't quite amusement, but was at least adjacent to it, and she uncrossed her arms. "Fine," she said, "but you're standing next to me when I do it." "Why?" "Because we're supposed to be married, and married people stand next to each other during crises. That's what the bankers want to see, isn't it? Stability." She said the word like it tasted sour, but she was right. 30 minutes later, Vanessa gathered the entire resort staff. Housekeepers, chefs, groundskeepers, front desk clerks, maintenance workers, all of them, in the grand ballroom. Nearly 80 people stood in clusters on the polished hardwood floor, their faces a mix of anxiety and curiosity. Vanessa stood at the front of the room with Ethan beside her, and she spoke. Not the way she spoke to lawyers or bankers or board members, not with the precise, weaponized language of a woman who'd learned to defend herself in conference rooms. She spoke like a person, like someone who was tired and frustrated and refusing to lie about it. "You all know that auditors are in the building today," she said. "Some of you are worried about what that means. I want to be direct with you, because you deserve that. My stepbrother has filed a complaint alleging financial irregularities. The allegation is false. Our books are clean, our taxes are filed correctly, and there is nothing in those records that I'm ashamed of or afraid of." She paused. "But Marcus Webb is not trying to find the truth. He's trying to create chaos. He wants you scared. He wants our guests uncomfortable. He wants the newspapers to print the word audit next to the name of this resort. And the best thing we can do, the only thing, is keep running this place exactly the way we've always run it, with pride, with excellence, with the knowledge that every single one of you has built something here that no court order can take away." The room was silent. Ethan watched the faces of the staff and saw something change. Not confidence exactly, but something like defiance. A cook in the back crossed his arms and nodded. One of the housekeepers wiped her eyes. When Vanessa finished, Gloria Chen was the first to start clapping. The rest followed, and the sound filled the ballroom with a warmth that no chandelier could provide. Walking back to the office afterward, Vanessa was quiet. Ethan kept pace beside her, saying nothing, until they reached the second-floor landing and she stopped. "I've never done that before," she said. "Done what?" "Talk to my staff like that. Like people, instead of employees. I always thought—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "I always thought vulnerability was something Marcus could use against me, so I never showed any, to anyone." "How'd it feel?" She considered this for a long moment. "Terrifying." "Good. That usually means it was the right thing to do." She looked at him with an expression he was learning to recognize. The look she got when she was recalculating something, adjusting an internal model she'd been running for years. Then she turned and walked into her office without another word. The audit lasted 5 days. The auditors found nothing, which Ethan suspected they'd known from the beginning. But Marcus had accomplished his real goal. 3 local papers ran stories about the Belmont being under investigation. And within a week, 2 corporate retreat bookings were canceled, and an inquiry from a travel magazine about featuring the resort went cold. Vanessa took each cancellation like a physical blow. She didn't show it in meetings or on calls, but Ethan saw it in the evenings. In the way she'd stand at the kitchen counter, holding a glass of wine she never drank, staring out the window at the lake with an expression that reminded him of the night at the diner. That look of a person running out of road. It was during one of these evenings that Lily performed what Ethan would later think of as her first act of structural engineering. Vanessa was standing at the counter, wine glass untouched, phone face down beside her. Lily was sprawled on the living room floor with her coloring book, working on a picture of a horse that she'd colored entirely purple. Without looking up, she said, "Vanessa, do you want to color with me?" Vanessa turned from the window. "What?" "Coloring. I have extra crayons. You can do the dog page. It's easy because dogs are mostly one color, except if it's a Dalmatian, and then it's hard." Ethan watched from the doorway, holding his breath. Vanessa looked at the coloring book, then at Lily, then at Ethan, as if checking whether this was some kind of test. He shrugged. Vanessa set down her wine glass. She walked to the living room, lowered herself to the floor in her $2,000 pants, and picked up a crayon. "What color should the dog be?" she asked. "Whatever you want. That's the whole point of coloring." "But what if I pick the wrong color?" Lily looked up at her with an expression of profound patience. "There's no wrong color. That's what I just said." Vanessa colored the dog blue. Lily approved. They colored together for 45 minutes, and in that time, Ethan watched something happen that no legal strategy or financial maneuver could have engineered. He watched Vanessa Sterling, a woman who controlled a $100 million empire and hadn't taken a day off in 6 years, sit cross-legged on the floor with a 7-year-old and argue about whether frogs could be orange. He watched the tension drain from her shoulders, watched her laugh at something Lily said about a teacher who sneezed like a trumpet, watched her forget, for 45 minutes, that anyone was trying to destroy her. And he thought, with a clarity that frightened him, I'm in trouble. Not because of the legal situation, not because of Marcus or the audits or the canceled bookings, because he was starting to feel something for Vanessa Sterling that had nothing to do with contracts or prenuptial agreements. And that was the one variable neither of them had planned for. He kept it to himself. He was good at that. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly difficult to call fake. Ethan continued commuting to Macon for work, but he found himself leaving earlier and getting home later, lingering in the apartment kitchen to cook dinner for 3 instead of grabbing fast food on the highway. Vanessa started appearing for meals, hesitantly at first, like a stray animal being lured with food, and then with something approaching expectation. She never asked for dinner. She just showed up at 6:30, hung her jacket on the back of a chair, and sat down. They talked about their days. Not the big things, not the lawsuits or the financial pressure or the ever-present threat of Marcus, but the small, ordinary things that accumulate between people who share a space. Vanessa complained about a vendor who'd shipped the wrong linens. Ethan described a foundation crack he'd found in a parking garage that everyone else had missed. Lily reported on the political dynamics of second-grade recess with the seriousness of a war correspondent. It was mundane. It was domestic. And it was the most peaceful Ethan had felt in 4 years. But the peace didn't last because Marcus Webb was not a man who allowed peace. The lawsuit arrived on a Thursday, hand-delivered to the Belmont by a courier who smiled while handing Gloria the envelope. Marcus was suing Vanessa directly, alleging breach of fiduciary duty in the management of the family estate. The claim was built on a tower of distortions, inflated expense reports, cherry-picked financial data, and a creative interpretation of her father's will that would have made any honest attorney cringe. But it was filed in a county court where Marcus had spent years cultivating relationships, and the judge assigned to the case had attended Marcus's birthday party the previous spring. Vanessa read the complaint in her office with the door closed. Ethan heard her throw something, a glass maybe, or a paperweight, and then silence. He waited 10 minutes before knocking. "Don't," she said through the door. "I brought coffee." "I don't want coffee." "It's from the fancy machine downstairs, the one that makes the little foam designs." A long pause. The door opened. Vanessa's eyes were dry but fierce, her jaw set so tight that Ethan could see the muscles working beneath her skin. "He's claiming I mismanaged my father's estate," she said, taking the coffee. "My father left me a building with a collapsing roof and $70,000 in debt. I turned it into this." She gestured at the window, at the manicured grounds and the gleaming facade below. "And Marcus is telling a judge that I mismanaged it." "What does David say?" "David says we fight. David always says we fight. David charges $400 an hour to say we fight." "Is he good?" "He's expensive. In law, that's supposed to be the same thing." They sat across from each other in her office, the lawsuit spread between them on the desk. Ethan read through it the way he read engineering reports, methodically looking for weak points. And he found them. "This section here," he said, pointing to a paragraph on page 12. "Marcus is citing maintenance expenditures from 3 years ago as evidence of financial waste. But these are capital improvements. The roof restoration, the plumbing overhaul, the electrical upgrade. Those aren't expenses. Those are investments that increase the property value." Vanessa leaned forward. "How do you know the difference?" "Because I'm a structural engineer. I know what building improvements cost, and I know what they're worth. These numbers aren't just reasonable, they're conservative. If anything, you underspent on the electrical work." Something sparked in Vanessa's eyes. "Could you testify to that?" "I could provide a professional assessment, an independent engineering evaluation of the capital improvements made to the Belmont over the past 6 years, with market comparables. It wouldn't be testimony exactly, but it would be evidence that any judge could understand. And it would blow a hole in Marcus's entire argument." "A structural hole," Ethan said, and then winced at his own pun. "Sorry." But Vanessa wasn't cringing. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not gratitude, not relief, but something more complicated. Something that looked almost like wonder, as if she'd spent her entire life expecting people to take from her and had momentarily forgotten that someone might choose to give instead. You'd really do that? Vanessa, I live here. Your fight is my fight. That was the deal. The deal was that you'd show up to events and hold my hand in front of bankers. Yeah, well, deals evolve. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and the air in the room changed, grew denser, charged with something that neither of them acknowledged. Then she looked down at the lawsuit, and the moment passed. But Ethan felt it settle somewhere in his chest, like a stone dropped into deep water. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan threw himself into the engineering assessment with a focus that surprised even him. He spent evenings after Lily's bedtime going through the Belmont's renovation records, comparing material costs against industry standards, photographing structural work, and compiling a report that was as thorough as anything he'd ever produced professionally. He worked at the kitchen table while Vanessa worked on the couch, both of them surrounded by papers and laptops. The only sound the clicking of keys and the occasional question lobbed across the room. What year was the HVAC system replaced? Ethan would ask. 2021. March. The old one died during a corporate retreat and a hedge fund manager almost had a heat stroke in the sauna that wasn't even turned on. Romantic. His wife didn't think so. They divorced that August. These late-night work sessions became their version of intimacy. Not physical, not romantic, but something quieter and more durable. They learned each other's rhythms. Vanessa worked in focused, intense bursts, barely moving for hours, then would suddenly stand up and pace the room like a caged animal. Ethan worked steadily, methodically, with periodic breaks to refill his coffee and stare out the window at nothing. She was a sprinter. He was a marathon runner. Somehow, they covered the same ground. The engineering report was 47 pages long when Ethan finished it. David Reeves read it, called it the most useful thing a non-lawyer has ever handed me, and filed it with the court as part of Vanessa's response to Marcus's lawsuit. The judge reviewed it, requested additional documentation, and within a week the most damaging allegations in Marcus's complaint were flagged as unsupported by independent evidence. It wasn't a victory. Not yet, but it was the first time Marcus had been pushed back, and the effect on Vanessa was visible. She stood a little straighter. She slept a little more. She smiled at Lily without the shadow of worry darkening her eyes. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning, while Ethan was making pancakes and Lily was setting the table with the exaggerated care of a child performing an important ritual, Vanessa walked into the kitchen wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, her hair uncombed, her face bare of makeup, and she looked so completely unlike the polished billionaire the world knew that Ethan almost didn't recognize her. "Chocolate chip?" she asked, sliding onto a stool. "Is there any other kind?" She caught his eye and something passed between them. Not a word, not a touch, just a look that lasted half a second too long. A look that said, "I know this isn't real. I know the contract has an end date. I know we're pretending. But right now, in this kitchen, with this kid setting forks in the wrong places and pancake batter on your shirt, I don't want to be anywhere else." Neither of them said it. Neither of them needed to. Lily put a fork on Vanessa's placemat and said, "I gave you the big fork because you're the tallest." Vanessa picked it up and held it like a scepter. "I accept this honor." Lily giggled. Ethan flipped a pancake, and the morning light came through the tall windows and fell across the three of them, like a benediction they hadn't asked for and didn't know how to refuse. That afternoon, while Lily napped on the couch with her head in Vanessa's lap, a development that had happened so naturally that neither adult had time to overthink it, Vanessa's phone rang. She answered it with her free hand, careful not to disturb the sleeping child, and listened for 30 seconds. Her face went white. "When?" she said. Ethan looked up from his book. "How much?" Vanessa's voice was barely above a whisper. "All of them?" She hung up and sat very still, her hand resting on Lily's hair, her eyes fixed on something Ethan couldn't see. "That was Gloria," she said. Marcus leaked the audit story to a national outlet, not just local papers this time. A business journalist from a major publication called The Resort, asking for comment on allegations of... She stopped, her throat working. Allegations of financial fraud and a fraudulent marriage used to manipulate lending institutions. The room went cold. "He named us?" Ethan asked. He named me. He named the marriage. He didn't use your name directly, but it's implied. The journalist has the courthouse records. She knows when we got married, how quickly it happened. She's asking questions about whether the marriage was arranged to influence bank decisions. Ethan set down his book. His hands were steady, but his pulse was hammering in his temples. What do we do? Vanessa looked down at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, one small hand curled around the hem of Vanessa's shirt. When she looked back up at Ethan, her eyes were harder than he'd ever seen them. We stopped playing defense, she said. Marcus wants a war. Fine. He's going to get one. The war started with the phone call, and it escalated with a headline. Vanessa spent the next 48 hours locked in her office with David Reeves and a crisis communications consultant named Patricia Langford, a severe woman with silver hair and a reputation for managing corporate disasters that would have sunk lesser companies. Ethan was not invited to these meetings. He understood why. He was not a lawyer, not a PR strategist, not a billionaire, but it stung in a way he didn't expect, and that surprised him. Somewhere in the past few weeks, he had stopped thinking of Vanessa's problems as separate from his own. The article dropped on a Wednesday morning. The headline read, Sterling Resort Empire Under Scrutiny, Questions Surround Billionaire's Sudden Marriage. It was published by a national business outlet with a readership in the millions, and within hours, it had been picked up by local affiliates, regional papers, and a half-dozen gossip sites that repackaged the allegations with less subtlety and more photographs. The photographs were the worst part. Someone had obtained the courthouse security footage from the day of the wedding. Vanessa in her navy dress, Ethan in his too-tight suit, Lily holding her dandelion bouquet. The images were grainy and unflattering, and they were plastered across every story with captions that ranged from skeptical to openly mocking. One site ran the photo under the words, Billionaire's Bargain Bride, inside the marriage that smells like a boardroom deal. Ethan saw the headline on his phone while sitting in his truck in the Hargrove & Associates parking lot. He read the article twice, his knuckles going white around the phone. The piece was carefully worded, just enough insinuation to be damaging, just enough hedging to avoid a libel suit. It quoted sources close to the family who alleged the marriage was arranged for financial purposes, cited the speed of the courtship, and noted that Ethan had no prior connection to the luxury hospitality industry. It did not quote Marcus Webb by name, but his fingerprints were on every paragraph. What made Ethan's stomach turn was the paragraph about Lily. Just one line, buried in the middle of the article. Cole's 7-year-old daughter from a previous relationship has reportedly been living at the Belmont since the marriage, raising questions about the arrangement's impact on the child. He called Vanessa. I saw it, she said before he could speak. They mentioned Lily. I know. One line. They put my daughter in a national article about fraud allegations, and they did it in one line, like she's a footnote, like she's a prop in whatever story Marcus is trying to tell. Ethan, I'm not angry at you. I need you to hear that. I'm not angry at you, but I'm going to need you to tell me right now what the plan is. Because if the plan is to sit in a conference room with lawyers and consultants and hope this blows over, that's not enough. Not anymore. The line was quiet. He could hear Vanessa breathing, and underneath that the muffled sound of voices. David Reeves, probably, and the consultant. Come home, Vanessa said. We need to talk. All of us. Ethan drove the 45 minutes back to the Belmont with his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. By the time he walked into Vanessa's office, the room had the atmosphere of a field hospital. Papers everywhere, coffee cups abandoned on every surface. Patricia Langford standing at the window with her arms crossed like a general surveying a losing battlefield. David Reeves was at the conference table, his tie loosened, his face drawn. He looked up when Ethan entered and nodded once, the way men nod at each other when things are bad and getting worse. Here's where we stand, David said without preamble. The article is damaging but not fatal. The allegations are all innuendo, nothing provable, nothing actionable. Marcus is smart enough to stay behind the curtain. Every quote in that piece is attributed to anonymous sources, and every claim is phrased as a question rather than a statement. Legally, we'd have a hard time winning a defamation case. So we can't sue, Ethan said. We can sue. We'd probably Lose, and the lawsuit itself would generate more coverage, which is exactly what Marcus wants. Patricia Langford turned from the window. The damage isn't legal. It's reputational. I've been monitoring the resort's booking system since the article went live. 6 cancellations in the past 4 hours. 3 corporate accounts have requested refunds on deposits for Q4 events. And I've received calls from 2 travel industry contacts saying that journalists are now digging into the Belmont's financial records, which are partially public because of the ongoing audit. Vanessa was sitting behind her desk, very still, her hands flat on the surface. She hadn't spoken since Ethan arrived. He looked at her and recognized the expression, the same one she'd worn at the diner that rainy night. Not defeat. Something worse. The look of someone calculating exactly how much more they could lose. What do you recommend? Ethan asked Patricia. Counter-narrative. We need to give the press something better to write about than Marcus Webb's anonymous allegations. Something visible, public, and impossible to spin as defensive. Like what? Patricia looked at Vanessa. A charity gala? Here, at the Belmont. Large-scale, high-profile, open to media. You invite every major donor, every corporate client, every journalist who's been sniffing around this story, and you put on an event that makes the Belmont look exactly like what it is. A world-class property run by a woman who has nothing to hide. That's a hell of a gamble, David said. Everything we've done so far has been reactive. Marcus attacks, we defend. Marcus leaks, we deny. We need to stop playing his game and start playing ours. Vanessa looked up. How long would we need to organize this? 3 weeks, maybe 4. We'd need to move fast. And the cost? Patricia's expression didn't change. Significant, 6 figures minimum. And that's before you factor in the security, the media coordination, and the catering for 300 guests. The number hung in the air. Ethan watched Vanessa's face and saw the calculation happening in real time. The mental arithmetic of a woman who knew exactly how much money she had, exactly how much she was losing, and exactly how thin the margin was getting. Do it, Vanessa said. Vanessa, David started. I said do it. Get me a plan by Friday. Guest list, budget, timeline, everything. If Marcus wants to burn my reputation in public, then I'll rebuild it in public, in front of every person who's ever doubted me. The room went quiet. Patricia nodded once sharply and began typing on her phone. David closed his folder with the weary resignation of a man who'd learned that arguing with Vanessa Sterling was a waste of billable hours. Ethan stayed after the others left. You okay? He asked. Stop asking me that. I'll stop when the answer stops being no. She looked at him, and something in her expression cracked. Not all the way, not enough for tears, but enough that he could see the exhaustion underneath. The real exhaustion, not the kind she wore as a performance. They put Lily's name in an article about fraud, she said quietly. Not her name, but close enough. She's 7. She doesn't even know what fraud means, and my stepbrother used her as a prop to make me look like a con artist. That wasn't your fault. It was my situation, same thing. No, it's really not. She pressed her fingers to her temples. The gala has to work, Ethan. If it doesn't, if it turns into another piece of ammunition for Marcus, I don't know what's left. I've leveraged everything. The resort, the accounts, my personal credit. If this fails, I don't have a backup plan. Then we make sure it doesn't fail. We? Yeah, we. That's the deal, remember? She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something he wasn't sure he could provide. Then she nodded, and the conversation was over, and they went back to work, which was all either of them knew how to do when the world was trying to pull the ground out from under them. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of Ethan's life, and that included the 6 months after Sarah left, when he'd been simultaneously learning to be a single parent and trying not to fall apart at his desk. Every night after Lily went to bed, he and Vanessa sat at the kitchen table and planned. Guest lists, seating charts, media strategies, catering options, security protocols. Vanessa handled the business side with the ferocious efficiency of a woman who'd been organizing high-stakes events since her mid-20s. Ethan handled the logistics, the physical infrastructure, the electrical capacity of the ballroom, the load-bearing limits of the terrace where cocktails would be served. You're treating this like a construction project, Vanessa said one night, watching him sketch a floor plan on the back of a napkin. Every event is a construction project. You're building a temporary structure, a controlled environment with ingress, egress, load management, and failure points. The only difference is that, instead of concrete, you're working with people. People are harder than concrete. People are impossible, but at least they don't need rebar. She laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her in weeks. Not the sharp, defensive laugh she used in meetings, but something unguarded and warm, a sound that caught them both off guard. She stopped abruptly, as if she'd accidentally revealed a secret, and looked down at her laptop. "We should finalize the donor list," she said, and the moment was over. But Ethan held on to the sound of that laugh the way a man holds on to a match in a dark room, carefully and with the full awareness that it could burn him. The gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening, 3 weeks out. Invitations went to 300 of the Belmont's most important clients, donors, community leaders, and, at Patricia Langford's insistence, 15 carefully selected journalists representing outlets that had covered the original allegations. "You don't hide from the press," Patricia said. "You feed them a better story." The charity angle was Ethan's idea. Rather than a simple showcase event, the gala would benefit a local foundation that provided housing assistance to single-parent families in central Georgia. It was personal, too personal maybe, but when Ethan proposed it, Vanessa looked at him for a long time and then said, "Yes, that's exactly right." The cause gave the event a purpose beyond self-promotion and made it nearly impossible for critics to attack without looking heartless. Marcus attacked anyway. 10 days before the gala, the Belmont's head of facilities, a quiet man named Ray Dawson, who'd worked at the resort since before Vanessa bought it, reported an electrical problem in the ballroom. Several circuits were tripping intermittently, and the main distribution panel was showing irregularities that shouldn't have been possible in a system that had been completely overhauled 2 years ago. Ethan went down to look at it himself, crawling into the utility space beneath the ballroom with a flashlight and a voltage tester. What he found made his blood freeze. 3 junction boxes had been tampered with, wires rerouted, connections loosened, breakers bypassed in a way that was designed to cause cascading failures under heavy load. Not immediately, not obviously, but when 300 guests were in the ballroom and the lighting, sound system, kitchen equipment, and climate control were all running simultaneously, the system would overload. At best, the entire ballroom would go dark. At worst, a short circuit could start a fire. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was sabotage. Ethan pulled himself out of the utility space, covered in dust and sweat, and called Vanessa. "Don't touch anything," he said. "Call David. Call the police. Someone has been in the electrical system." "What do you mean, someone's been in it?" "I mean, someone who knows what they're doing crawled under the ballroom and rewired 3 junction boxes so the whole system would fail during the gala. This is deliberate. This is criminal." The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was controlled but thin, like glass about to break. "Marcus, we don't know that yet. We know it, Ethan. We just can't prove it yet." She was right. But proving it and knowing it were 2 different problems, and Ethan could only solve one of them at a time. He spent the next 14 hours in the utility space, systematically undoing the sabotage. It was painstaking, dangerous work. Every loosened connection had to be identified, tested, and properly restored. Every bypassed breaker had to be reset. Every rerouted wire had to be traced back to its original path. He worked through the night, his phone propped against a pipe for light when the overhead bulbs couldn't reach, his hands cramping around wire strippers and voltage testers. At 2 a.m, Vanessa appeared at the entrance to the utility space, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that was equal parts worry and something else. Something that looked like admiration, though she would have denied it. "You should sleep," she said, handing him a cup. "I'll sleep when the ballroom won't catch fire. Ethan, you've been down here for 10 hours, and I'll be here for 10 more if that's what it takes. This is what I do, Vanessa. You fight legal battles. I fix buildings. Let me fix your building." She knelt beside the utility hatch, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with coffee and the faint, anxious sweat of someone who hadn't slept either. You're doing this for free, you know. This isn't in the prenup. Yeah, well, a lot of things aren't in the prenup. The words came out heavier than he intended, loaded with a meaning he hadn't planned to reveal. Vanessa looked at him, really looked at him, and in the harsh fluorescent light of the utility space, surrounded by dust and exposed wiring and the smell of old concrete, something passed between them that couldn't be filed in a legal document or discussed in a conference room. Be careful down there, she said softly, and left. Ethan finished the repairs at 6 in the morning, tested every circuit 3 times, and emerged from the utility space looking like he'd crawled through a coal mine. He showered, slept for 2 hours, and then drove Lily to school with his eyes barely open and coffee in a thermos between his knees. Dad, you look terrible, Lily said from the back seat. Thanks, Bug. Did you sleep in the floor again? Under it, actually. That's weird. Yeah, it kind of was. The police investigation into the sabotage moved slowly, too slowly for Vanessa's liking, but fast enough to confirm what they already suspected. Security footage from the Belmont's cameras showed a gap of 40 minutes during which the cameras in the basement corridor had been looped, the same section of empty hallway playing on repeat while someone accessed the utility space undetected. The technical sophistication of both the camera manipulation and the electrical sabotage pointed to professional involvement, not a random act. David Reeves filed a criminal complaint naming the incident but not the suspect. Patricia Langford briefed the invited journalists on the sabotage, framing it as evidence that someone was trying to prevent the gala from happening, a narrative that made the event itself feel more important, more urgent, more worth attending. 3 news outlets that had initially declined invitations changed their minds. Marcus Webb, reached for comment by a local reporter, expressed concern about safety at the Belmont and suggested that perhaps Ms. Sterling should focus on maintaining her property rather than hosting elaborate parties. Vanessa read the quote on her phone and said nothing for a full minute. Then she set the phone down and said, Saturday. We end this on Saturday. The day of the gala arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt personally vindictive. Clear skies, golden light, a gentle breeze that carried the smell of the lake through the Belmont's open windows. The ballroom had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers caught the late afternoon sun. Tables set with white linen and fresh flowers stretched in elegant rows beneath a ceiling that Ethan now knew was held together by wiring he'd repaired with his own hands 4 days earlier. A string quartet warmed up in the corner. Catering staff moved through the kitchen with military precision. Vanessa dressed in her apartment, and when she came downstairs, Ethan was waiting in the lobby in a rented tuxedo that fit better than his wedding suit, but still made him feel like a kid playing dress-up. She wore a deep emerald gown that probably cost more than his truck, her hair swept up, her face composed in the careful, elegant mask she wore for the public. But when she saw him, the mask slipped for just a second, and underneath it was a woman who was terrified and exhausted and holding on by her fingernails. You look good, he said. I look like I haven't slept in 3 days. That too. But the dress helps. She almost smiled. Ready? No, let's go anyway. They walked into the ballroom together, side by side, and for the next 4 hours they performed the most convincing act of their marriage. Ethan shook hands with corporate executives, made small talk with county officials, and told the story of how he and Vanessa had reconnected. A version of the truth that was close enough to be believable and far enough to be safe. Vanessa moved through the room with the grace of someone who'd been hosting events since she was 25, but Ethan noticed her hand find his arm whenever the crowd pressed close, noticed her lean into him during conversations with journalists, noticed the way she used his presence as an anchor. It wasn't fake. That was the part that got to him. The hand on his arm, the way she turned to him after a difficult conversation. The small, private look she gave him when a donor said something stupid and she needed to not laugh in the man's face. None of it was performed. It was the unconscious behavior of a woman who had, without meaning to and without admitting it, started to rely on someone for the first time in years. The speeches began at 9 o'clock. Patricia Langford introduced the charity component, and a representative from the Housing Foundation spoke about the families they'd served. Then Vanessa took the microphone. She stood at the podium in front of 300 guests and 15 journalists and every doubt Marcus Webb had planted in the public's mind. And she spoke. Not the rehearsed remarks Patricia had written for her, not the careful lawyered language of a corporate CEO protecting her brand. She spoke about her father, about the building he'd left her, about the years of work it had taken to turn a crumbling estate into something worth fighting for. She spoke about the Belmont staff, 80 people whose livelihoods depended on this resort surviving. She spoke about the attacks she'd endured, without naming Marcus, without self-pity, without anger. Just facts. Just the truth, delivered by a woman who was tired of hiding behind lawyers and press releases. And then she said something that wasn't in any script. "People have questioned my personal life recently," she said, her voice steady but raw. "They've questioned my marriage. They've questioned my motives. They've looked at the man standing in the back of this room, the man who spent last Tuesday night crawling through an electrical tunnel beneath this floor to make sure this event could happen safely. And they've called him a prop, a convenience." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but it carried through the silent ballroom like a bell. "Ethan Cole is the most decent man I have ever known. He didn't marry me for money. He didn't marry me for status. He married me because I asked him to, because I needed help, and because he is the kind of person who helps. And if anyone in this room or reading about this room tomorrow wants to question whether that's real, I invite you to spend 5 minutes with him. You'll have your answer." The ballroom was silent. 300 people, 15 journalists, a string quartet with their bows suspended midair, and not a single sound. Then Lily's voice, clear as a bell from somewhere near the dessert table. "That's my dad!" Laughter broke the silence, and then applause. Not polite, not obligatory, but real, the kind that starts in one corner and builds until it fills the room and shakes the chandeliers. Ethan stood in the back of the ballroom with his hands in his pockets and his throat tight and his vision blurring, and he thought, "She means it. That woman standing at that podium in front of the whole world just told the truth. Not the truth we rehearsed, not the truth the lawyers approved, the real truth. She loves me, and she just said it without saying it, and every person in this room heard it. And the thing that terrified him most was that he felt exactly the same way." The applause was still echoing in Ethan's ears when Vanessa stepped down from the podium and walked straight toward him. Not toward the donors waiting to shake her hand. Not toward the journalists with their recorders already out. Not toward Patricia Langford, who was signaling from the side of the room with the controlled urgency of a woman who had follow-up talking points prepared. She walked past all of them, through the crowd that parted without being asked, and stopped in front of Ethan with her chin up and her eyes bright and her hands shaking at her sides. "I went off script," she said. "I noticed. Patricia is going to kill me. Patricia is going to give you a raise. That was the best PR you've ever done, and you did it by accident." Vanessa shook her head. "It wasn't an accident. I looked at the speech Patricia wrote, and it was fine. It was perfect. Every word was calibrated to manage perceptions and control the narrative and protect the brand. And I stood up there and I thought, I am so tired of being a brand." She paused. "So I said what was true instead." Ethan wanted to touch her, wanted to put his hands on her arms, pull her close, tell her that what she'd said from that podium was the bravest thing he'd ever witnessed. But 300 people were watching, including 15 journalists, and the difference between a genuine moment and a photo opportunity was something he couldn't afford to get wrong. So he said, "You did good, Vanessa." And she said, "Don't make me cry in front of the caterers," and turned back to the room with her shoulders squared and her composure rebuilt. And the gala continued. The rest of the evening moved in a blur of champagne, handshakes, and conversations that Ethan would barely remember the next morning. What he would remember was Lily falling asleep in a chair near the kitchen entrance, her yellow dress crumpled, a chocolate truffle melting in her open palm. He would remember Gloria Chen dancing with one of the groundskeepers while the string quartet played something slow and sweet. He would remember a journalist from the outlet that had published the original hit piece approaching Vanessa near the end of the night, notepad in hand, and Vanessa answering every question with the calm directness of someone who had nothing left to protect. And he would remember the ride up in the elevator afterward, just the three of them. Ethan carrying a sleeping Lily, Vanessa leaning against the wall with her shoes in one hand and her eyes closed, and the silence between them that felt nothing like the silences of their first weeks together. Those had been empty, transactional, the silence of strangers sharing a space. This silence was full. It had weight. It was the silence of two people who understood something new about each other and hadn't yet found the words for it. Ethan put Lily to bed, tucking the blanket around her the way she liked, with the edge folded under her chin. When he came back to the living room, Vanessa was standing at the window in her bare feet, the emerald gown pooling on the hardwood floor, looking out at the lake. "Thank you," she said without turning around. "For fixing the ballroom, for standing there tonight, for all of it. You don't have to thank me. I do, actually, because nobody's done this for me before. Nobody has ever—" She stopped. Her reflection in the window was transparent, ghost-like, and Ethan could see her expression even though she was facing away from him. "I've had lawyers fight for me, and consultants manage me, and employees work for me. But nobody has ever just been on my side, not like this. Your staff is on your side. Gloria would walk through a wall for you. Gloria is loyal to the Belmont. That's not the same thing. It's close." "It's not." She turned from the window. "You crawled through an electrical tunnel for 14 hours. You drove 45 minutes each way to a job you keep because I asked you not to quit. You let your daughter call me—" She stopped again, her voice catching. "You let her sit in my lap and fall asleep holding my shirt. Do you know what that means to someone who's never had that? Who's never had anyone just choose to be near them without a contract or a paycheck or an obligation?" Ethan stood very still. The apartment was quiet. The gala sounds faded to nothing below them, and the moonlight through the window turned everything silver and strange. "Vanessa," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay. Is this still a business arrangement?" The question landed in the space between them like a stone in still water. Vanessa looked at him for a long time, and he watched her cycle through the responses she could give. The safe ones, the strategic ones, the ones that kept the prenuptial agreement intact and the emotional risk at zero. He watched her consider and discard each one. "No," she said. "I don't think it has been for a while." "Since when?" "Since you made me a burnt grilled cheese and didn't apologize for it." He laughed, and the sound broke something open in the room, some invisible barrier that had been holding them in their separate corners. He took a step toward her, and she didn't step back. "I'm scared," she said. "I need you to know that. I'm not good at this. I don't know how to be with someone without a contract defining the terms. I don't know how to trust someone with the parts of me that aren't profitable or strategic or useful. And I'm terrified that if I let this become real, really real, and it falls apart, I won't survive it. Not because of the money or the resort, because of you and Lily. Because you're the first thing in my life that I didn't have to earn or build or defend, and I don't know what I'd do if I lost that." Ethan reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold, and they trembled when he took them, and he held on anyway. "I'm scared too," he said. "I've been scared since the night at the diner. I'm scared that I'm not enough for this, for your world, for the legal fights, for the kind of life you live. I'm a structural engineer from Macon, Georgia, who drives a truck that stalls in the rain. I don't know how to talk to investors or navigate board meetings or do any of the things your life requires. And I'm scared that one day you're going to wake up and realize that the man you married in a courthouse for $200,000 is exactly as ordinary as he looks. You're not ordinary. Vanessa, you're not. You are stubborn, and you burn grilled cheese, and you make terrible puns about structural integrity, and you fall asleep on the couch with engineering reports on your chest. And you are the best father I've ever seen, and you are not ordinary. Don't you dare call yourself ordinary." They stood there in the moonlight, holding hands like teenagers at a school dance, two adults who'd spent their entire lives building walls and were now standing in the rubble of them, trying to figure out what came next. Ethan kissed her. Not the dry, business-like press on the cheek from their courthouse wedding. A real kiss, clumsy, a little off-center, because he turned his head the wrong way and their noses bumped and Vanessa made a sound that was half surprise and half laugh. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't cinematic. It was two tired, scared, imperfect people reaching for each other in the dark, and it was the most honest thing either of them had done in years. When they pulled apart, Vanessa said, "That was terrible. Yeah, do it again." He did. It was better the second time. They didn't sleep together that night. They sat on the couch and talked. really talked. Not about legal strategy or financial projections or Marcus Webb, but about themselves. Vanessa told him about her childhood in Savannah, about her father who'd been a quiet, serious man with big hands and a workshop full of woodworking tools he never finished projects with. She told him about Diane, the stepmother who'd swept into their lives when Vanessa was 14 and remade the household in her own image. Cold, transactional, obsessed with appearance. About Marcus, who'd been 16 when their parents married, a sullen, resentful boy who treated Vanessa like an intruder in her own home. He hated me from the first day, Vanessa said. Not because I'd done anything, just because I existed. Because my father loved me and Diane loved Marcus, and there wasn't enough love in that house for all of us. Ethan told her about Sarah. He hadn't planned to. He'd kept that wound closed for 4 years, sealed under layers of routine and work, and the daily necessity of being strong for Lily. But sitting on the couch at 2 a.m, with Vanessa's head on his shoulder and the lake glittering outside, the words came out. She left a note, he said, on the kitchen counter between the toaster and a stack of Lily's drawings. 3 sentences. I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. Please don't look for me. That was it. 4 years of marriage, a 3-year-old daughter, and she fit the whole thing on a Post-it note. Did you look for her? For about 6 months. Then I stopped because I realized I wasn't looking for Sarah anymore. I was looking for an explanation, and there isn't one. Some people leave. They just leave, and the people they leave behind have to figure out how to keep going without understanding why. Lily doesn't remember her much. She remembers pieces, a smell, a song, the way Sarah used to braid her hair before bed. She doesn't remember the leaving. That's the one mercy. Vanessa was quiet for a while. Her hand was resting on his chest, over his heart, and he could feel the warmth of her palm through his shirt. I won't leave, she said. I need you to hear that. Whatever happens, with the resort, with Marcus, with us, I won't leave. Not like that. Not without an explanation. Not without fighting for it first. You can't promise that. I just did. People say things at 2 a.m. that they don't mean at noon. Ethan. She lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him, and her eyes were fierce in a way that had nothing to do with business or strategy. I have spent my entire adult life keeping promises that other people told me were impossible. I rebuilt a condemned building into a luxury resort. I fought my stepbrother through 6 years of legal warfare without losing a single asset. I organized a charity gala in 3 weeks while someone was literally sabotaging the wiring beneath my feet. If I say I won't leave, I won't leave. You can take that to whatever bank will have us. He believed her. Against his better judgment, against the scar tissue that Sarah had left on his ability to trust, against every rational warning in his engineer's brain about structures built on uncertain foundations, he believed her. Because Vanessa Sterling did not say things she didn't mean. It was one of her best qualities and one of her most exhausting ones. And in that moment, it was enough. The morning after the gala, the world looked different. Not because anything had changed. Marcus was still out there. The legal battles were still pending. The press was still circling. But because Ethan and Vanessa had changed, and that shifted the gravity of everything around them. They ate breakfast together. Not the awkward, separate meals of their early weeks, and not the increasingly comfortable kitchen table dinners of the past month, but a real breakfast. Pancakes, the chocolate chip kind, with Lily directing operations from her stool like a tiny foreman. Vanessa, you're not flipping them fast enough, Lily said. I'm flipping them at the appropriate speed. Dad flips them faster. Your father also burns them. That's the best part. Vanessa looked at Ethan over Lily's head, and they shared a smile that belonged to the two of them alone. Private, a little bewildered. The smile of people who'd stumbled into something they hadn't expected to find. The coverage from the gala began appearing that afternoon, and Patricia Langford had been right. The story was better than anything Marcus could compete with. The journalist from the national outlet published a follow-up piece with the headline, Sterling Resort Hosts Charity Gala Amid Sabotage Allegations. The tone was dramatically different from the original article. Where the first piece had been skeptical and insinuating, this one was almost admiring, noting the sabotage investigation, the charity partnership, and, in a paragraph that made Ethan blush when he read it. The unmistakable dynamic between Vanessa Sterling and her husband, Ethan Cole, whose quiet, steady presence at the event suggested a partnership built on considerably more than convenience. More importantly, 3 of the corporate accounts that had canceled their bookings called back. 2 new inquiries came in from luxury travel agencies, and the county judge overseeing Marcus's latest lawsuit requested a status conference, citing new information regarding the credibility of the plaintiff's claims, which David Reeves translated as, "The judge read the articles, and he's wondering if Marcus is wasting his time." The momentum was shifting, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks and complications that Ethan was learning to expect, but shifting nonetheless. And then, 8 days after the gala, Marcus played his last card. It came in the form of a phone call from David Reeves at 6 in the morning. Ethan was in the kitchen pouring coffee when the phone rang. He answered because Vanessa was in the shower, and what David told him made him set down the coffee pot and sit down at the counter very carefully, as if the floor might give way. "We've received a forensic report," David said, "from the investigator we hired to look into the sabotage. The electrical work wasn't done by an amateur. It was professional. Specifically, it matches the methodology of a licensed electrician named Carl Brewer, who's done contract work for Webb Holdings for the past 4 years. You can connect the sabotage to Marcus directly?" "Not directly, not yet. But Brewer's phone records show 3 calls to Marcus Webb's personal cell in the week before the sabotage. And yesterday, the county sheriff's office executed a search warrant on Brewer's workshop. They found diagrams of the Belmont's electrical system, diagrams that could only have come from the resort's own maintenance files, which means someone inside the building gave them to him." Ethan's stomach dropped. Someone on Vanessa's staff. That's the implication. The sheriff is investigating, but Ethan, there's more. The forensic team also found something in Marcus's financial records. They were examining the audit complaint, the original one that started all of this, and they discovered that the irregularities Marcus reported to the state revenue office were fabricated. He didn't find financial problems in Vanessa's books. He created them. Falsified documents, doctored spreadsheets, manufactured evidence. The forensic accountant's report is 63 pages long, and it's devastating. Devastating how? Devastating as in Marcus Webb committed fraud to initiate a state audit of his stepsister's business. That's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. Filing false reports with a state agency, tampering with financial records, obstruction of justice if the sabotage charges stick. His attorneys are going to have a very bad week. Ethan sat at the counter, phone pressed to his ear, and felt something he hadn't felt since the night at the diner. The weight lifting. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to breathe. Vanessa came out of the bedroom in a bathrobe, toweling her hair, and saw his face. "What happened?" she asked. "Sit down." "Ethan, what happened?" "Sit down, Vanessa." She sat. He told her everything David had said, watching her face as the information landed. The connection to Brewer, the fabricated audit complaint, the forensic report. He watched her cycle through disbelief, fury, relief, and something else that he couldn't name at first. Then he recognized it, because he'd seen it once before. On the face of a construction worker he'd known years ago. A man who'd been fighting a wrongful termination case for 2 years and had finally won. It was the expression of someone who'd been holding a weight so long that they'd forgotten what their body felt like without it, and who was now suddenly, unexpectedly, allowed to set it down. Vanessa pressed both hands flat on the counter. She didn't speak for a long time. "It's over?" she whispered. "Not yet. But the end is starting. David says the sheriff's office is preparing an arrest warrant. Marcus's attorneys have been notified. The state revenue office is reopening the audit investigation, but this time they're looking at Marcus, not you." She pressed her hands harder against the counter, as if holding herself in place. A sound escaped her. Not a sob, not a laugh. Something between the two, a sound that came from a place deeper than words could reach. Then she put her face in her hands and cried. Ethan got up, walked around the counter, and put his arms around her. She turned into him, pressing her face against his chest, and he held her while she shook. Not the composed, controlled Vanessa Sterling who managed crises and delivered speeches and never let anyone see her bleed. Just Vanessa. Just a woman who'd been fighting alone for 6 years and was finally, for the first time, letting someone else hold her up. Lily padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, saw them, and stopped. "Is Vanessa sad?" she asked. Ethan looked down at his daughter. "She's okay, Bug. She's just feeling a lot of things right now." Lily walked over, reached up, and placed her small hand on Vanessa's arm. "It's okay," she said, with the simple authority of a child who believed the world could be fixed with the right words. "Dad cries sometimes, too. But then we have pancakes, and it's better." Vanessa lifted her face from Ethan's chest. Her eyes were red, her nose was running, and she looked nothing like a billionaire. She looked like a person, messy, overwhelmed, deeply human. And she looked down at Lily with an expression that Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his life. "Pancakes sound really good right now," Vanessa said. "I'll get the chocolate chips," Lily said, and ran to the pantry. Vanessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looked up at Ethan, and said, "I love you. I know it's complicated, and I know the timing is terrible. And I know there's still a prenuptial agreement with a dissolution clause and 100 things we haven't figured out. But I love you, and I love that kid, and I am done pretending that this is something it stopped being a long time ago." Ethan kissed the top of her head, tasting salt from her tears and the faint scent of the shampoo she used, and said, "I love you too, and the timing isn't terrible. It's exactly right." From the pantry, Lily's voice, "I can't reach the chocolate chips." "Coming, Bug." And the morning continued, imperfect, ordinary, and more real than anything a contract could have created. The arrest happened on a Tuesday, 6 days after the forensic report landed on David Reeves's desk, and it was nothing like the movies. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches in marble-floored lobbies, no slow-motion shots of handcuffs clicking shut. Marcus Webb was taken into custody at 9:47 in the morning at a Starbucks drive-thru in downtown Macon, his window still rolled down, his order still sitting on the counter inside. 2 deputies from the Bibb County Sheriff's Office approached his vehicle, informed him of the charges: 3 counts of filing false reports with a state agency, 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit criminal property damage, and asked him to step out of the car. He did. He didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't make a scene. According to the deputy's report, the only thing Marcus Webb said was, "I want my lawyer." Vanessa found out from David Reeves, who called at 10:15. She was in her office reviewing occupancy projections for the upcoming quarter, and Ethan was across the room working on the engineering assessment updates. He watched her face as she listened, the slow, careful way she set down her pen, the way her eyes widened and then narrowed, the way she pressed her free hand flat against the desk as if steadying herself against a current. "When?" she asked. She listened. "How long will he be held?" She listened again. "Okay. Thank you, David." She hung up and sat very still. Ethan waited. He'd learned over the past months that Vanessa processed big information the way a building absorbs an earthquake, silently, internally, with all the stress hidden beneath the surface until she decided what to do with it. "Marcus was arrested this morning," she said. 3 counts of fraud, plus the sabotage conspiracy. Bail hearing is tomorrow. How do you feel?" She considered this for a long time. "I thought I'd feel relieved, or vindicated, or something dramatic. But I just feel..." She shook her head. "I feel tired. I feel like I've been running for 6 years and someone just told me I can stop, and my legs don't know how." "Then sit down." "I am sitting down. I mean really sit down. Not the way you sit in this office, which is basically standing with your knees bent. I mean go upstairs, put on those sweatpants you pretend you don't own, and sit on the couch like a human being." The faintest smile crossed her face. "I have a company to run. Gloria can run it for one afternoon. She's been running it behind your back for years anyway." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, closed it, and then stood up. She walked to the door, paused, and looked back at him. "Are you coming? Someone has to make sure you actually sit down." They went upstairs. Vanessa changed into the sweatpants, gray, ancient, with a faded Georgia Tech logo on the hip that Ethan suspected she'd owned since college. She sat on the couch, and Ethan sat beside her, and for the first time since he'd known her, Vanessa Sterling did absolutely nothing. No phone calls, no emails, no legal documents, no occupancy reports. She sat on the couch with her feet tucked under her and her head on Ethan's shoulder, and she breathed. "This is weird," she said after 10 minutes. "What is?" "Doing nothing. I don't think I've done nothing since I was 23. How does it feel?" "Uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that don't fit." "Give it time." "I don't like giving things time. I like making things happen." "I know, that's why you need practice at this." She was quiet for a while, then, "Do you think he'll go to prison?" "David seems to think so." "I don't want him to go to prison." Ethan turned to look at her. "You don't?" "No, I mean, I want him to stop. I want him to be held accountable. I want the lawsuits dismissed and the false reports retracted, and the world to know that I didn't do anything wrong. But prison?" She paused. "He's my stepbrother. We grew up in the same house. He taught me to ride a bike when I was 15 because my father was too busy with the bed and breakfast, and Diane said girls didn't need to know how. I remember him holding the back of the seat, running beside me down the driveway, yelling, 'Don't look down! Don't look down!' And now he's in handcuffs because he tried to destroy me. I don't know how to reconcile those two things. I don't know if I ever will." Ethan didn't try to reconcile them for her. He'd learned that some things didn't resolve. They just sat inside you, contradictory and permanent, and you carried them the way you carried everything else, with your back straight and your feet moving. "You don't have to figure it out today," he said. "What if I never figure it out?" "Then you don't. And that's okay too." She pressed closer to him on the couch, and they sat together in the quiet, and outside the window, the lake caught the autumn light and threw it back in broken pieces. The legal aftermath unfolded over the following weeks, with the slow, grinding inevitability of a machine that had been set in motion and could not be stopped. Marcus Webb's bail was set at $500,000, which he posted within 24 hours. But the conditions of his release were severe: no contact with Vanessa or anyone associated with the Belmont, surrender of his passport, and mandatory check-ins with a pretrial services officer. The forensic investigation expanded. Carl Brewer, the electrician who had sabotaged the ballroom, cooperated with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony was detailed and damning. Marcus had paid him $12,000 in cash to tamper with the electrical system, with specific instructions to ensure the failure would occur during the gala. The camera manipulation had been handled by a separate contractor, a security technician who had also been paid in cash and who, when confronted by investigators, broke down in the sheriff's interview room and provided a full account of the scheme. The inside source, the person who had given Brewer the electrical diagrams, turned out to be a member of the Belmont's maintenance staff, a young man named Tyler, who had been hired 8 months earlier on Marcus's quiet recommendation. Tyler had been feeding information to Marcus for months: guest lists, financial schedules, maintenance records, anything that could be used to exploit vulnerabilities. When Gloria Chen discovered the connection, she was furious. Not the cold professional fury that Vanessa deployed in business settings, but the hot personal fury of a woman who felt her trust had been violated. "I vetted him," Gloria said, standing in Vanessa's office with her arms crossed and her jaw set. "I checked his references. I interviewed him twice, and that little weasel was reporting to Marcus the entire time." "It's not your fault, Gloria. It was my hire, my responsibility. And it was Marcus's deception. You can't catch every lie. Nobody can." Gloria shook her head, unconvinced, and walked out. Vanessa watched her go with an expression that Ethan recognized, the look of a leader who understood that some wounds were beyond her ability to heal. Tyler was fired immediately and later charged with conspiracy. His departure left a gap in the maintenance team, and Ethan found himself spending more time on the resort's physical infrastructure than he'd intended, checking systems, reviewing maintenance logs, training Ray Dawson on the electrical upgrades he'd made during the sabotage repair. It was work he was good at, work that made sense to him, and he discovered, somewhat to his surprise, that he enjoyed it more than his job at Hargrove and Associates. The lawsuits collapsed one by one. The breach of fiduciary duty claim was dismissed after David Reeves presented the forensic evidence that Marcus had fabricated the financial irregularities underlying the entire complaint. The conservatorship petition was withdrawn by Marcus's own attorneys, who were rapidly distancing themselves from their client. The State Revenue Office formally closed the audit of the Belmont's finances and opened a new investigation into Marcus Webb's business holdings, which turned out to have their own considerable irregularities. The media narrative reversed itself with the speed and thoroughness that only media narratives can achieve. The same outlets that had questioned Vanessa's marriage and hinted at fraud now published stories about her resilience, her charity work, and the sabotage she'd survived. The journalist who'd written the original hit piece published a lengthy correction and a follow-up article that was, by any measure, a puff piece, though Patricia Langford insisted on calling it a recalibration of public perception. "They're the same reporters who tried to destroy you 3 months ago," Ethan said, reading the articles on his phone at the kitchen table. "I know. And now they're calling you inspiring." "I know. Doesn't that bother you?" Vanessa considered this while buttering toast. "It used to. When I was younger, I took it personally. Every negative article, every unfair headline. I'd lie awake at night composing rebuttals in my head. But at some point, I realized that the press isn't personal. It's weather. You can't control it, you can't reason with it, and if you spend your life reacting to it, you'll never get anything built. That's surprisingly mature. I have my moments." Lily came into the kitchen carrying a drawing she'd made at school. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a large building: a tall figure with brown hair, a slightly shorter figure with dark hair, and a small figure in yellow. "That's us," Lily said, pointing. "That's Dad, that's Mom, and that's me." The word hit the room like a bell. Mom. Lily had never used it before. Not for Vanessa, not for anyone since Sarah. She said it casually, the way children say things that carry enormous weight, without any awareness of the impact. Ethan looked at Vanessa. She was standing at the counter with a butter knife in one hand and her toast forgotten, staring at Lily with an expression that he would remember for as long as he lived. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't joy, exactly, though joy was part of it. It was the expression of a woman who had spent her entire adult life believing she would never hear that word directed at her, and who was now hearing it from a 7-year-old in a kitchen that smelled like burnt toast, and who had no idea what to do with the feeling it created. "You drew us," Vanessa said, her voice careful and steady in the way voices are when the person speaking is trying very hard not to cry. "Yeah. Miss Patterson said draw your family, so I did." "It's beautiful, Bug," Ethan said, and the word Bug, his word, his private name for his daughter, felt different now, expanded, because the family it belonged to had grown by one. Vanessa knelt down and took the drawing from Lily's hands. She studied it with the same intensity she brought to financial reports and legal documents, examining every detail: the misshapen windows, the stick figure arms, the bright yellow sun in the corner. "Can I keep this?" she asked. "It's for the refrigerator," Lily said, as if this were obvious. "Of course, the refrigerator." They put it on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a pineapple, and it stayed there for months, long after the edges curled and the colors faded. It was the first piece of art in a home that had plenty of expensive things on its walls but had never, until now, had anything that mattered. The months that followed brought changes that were slower and less dramatic than the crisis that had preceded them, but no less significant. Marcus Webb's criminal trial was scheduled for the spring, and his legal team, sensing the futility of fighting charges backed by cooperating witnesses and forensic evidence, began negotiating a plea deal. The details were handled by lawyers and prosecutors, far from Vanessa's daily life, and she made a deliberate choice not to follow every development. "I've spent 6 years with Marcus Webb living in my head," she told Ethan one evening, sitting on the balcony overlooking the lake. "He's been the first thing I think about in the morning, and the last thing I think about at night. And I'm done. I'm done giving him that space. Whatever the courts decide, they decide. I'm not going to let him occupy one more minute of my life." It was easier said than done, and there were nights when Ethan found her awake at 2 in the morning, staring at her phone, reading legal updates she'd promised herself she wouldn't read. But the frequency decreased over time, and the grip loosened, and gradually, not all at once, not smoothly, but gradually, Vanessa Sterling began to live a life that wasn't defined by the person trying to destroy her. The Belmont recovered. Bookings returned, slowly at first and then in a rush, as the positive media coverage and the charity gala's success rippled through the luxury travel world. Corporate clients who had canceled came back with larger contracts. A prominent travel magazine ran a feature on the resort, not the scandal, not the legal drama, but the property itself, the history, the restoration, the experience. Reservations for the following year exceeded anything in the resort's history. Vanessa expanded. She hired a new operations director to work alongside Gloria, freeing herself from the day-to-day micromanagement that had consumed her for 6 years. She invested in renovations, the spa, the lakeside cabins, the gardens. And she did it not with the frantic urgency of someone defending her territory, but with the careful attention of someone building something meant to last. And Ethan surprised himself. It started with the maintenance work he'd been doing since Tyler's departure. He'd been filling in temporarily, applying his engineering expertise to the resort's physical systems, and he discovered something he hadn't expected. He loved it. Not the way he loved structural engineering in the abstract, the theoretical elegance of load calculations and stress distributions, but in a more immediate, tangible way. He loved walking the grounds and knowing that every pipe, every wire, every foundation wall was sound because he'd checked it himself. He loved solving problems that had physical, visible solutions. A leaking roof repaired, a heating system optimized, a crumbling stone wall rebuilt. He loved being part of something he could see and touch and stand inside of. One evening, 3 months after Marcus's arrest, Ethan sat down at the kitchen table with a beer and told Vanessa something he'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to leave Hargrove." She looked up from her laptop. "What?" "My firm. I want to quit." "Ethan, your job was one of your conditions. You said you wanted to keep your career." "I know what I said. I'm saying something different now." Vanessa closed her laptop. "Talk to me." "I've been commuting 45 minutes each way to a job that stopped challenging me 3 years ago. Working for a man who thinks leadership means raising his voice, designing parking garages I'll never set foot in again. And every evening, I come back here and spend 2 hours working on this place, this building, this property, and it's the best part of my day. Not because it's yours, because it's ours, because I can see the impact. Because when I fix something here, I'm fixing something that matters to the people I care about. You want to work at the Belmont full-time. I want to run operations, the physical side, maintenance, renovations, capital improvements, infrastructure planning. I'm a structural engineer. This is a structure. Let me take care of it." Vanessa studied him for a long moment. He could see her thinking, calculating, running the idea through the complex matrix of her business brain. But underneath the calculation, there was something else, something warm and slightly disbelieving, the look of a woman who had spent years being surrounded by people who wanted things from her and was now looking at a man who was asking to give her something. "You'd be taking a pay cut," she said. "The current arrangement pays me $200,000 to be your fake husband. I think we can renegotiate." "The marriage isn't fake anymore." "Exactly. So pay me a real salary to do real work, and we can throw the prenup in the lake." She laughed. The real laugh, the unguarded one, the one that he'd first heard late at night over napkin floor plans, and that still caught him off guard every time. "You can't throw legal documents in a lake. David can draft a dissolution, or whatever the legal term is for we're actually married now and we'd like to stop pretending we're not. The legal term is amendment to the prenuptial agreement reflecting changed circumstances and mutual intent to continue the marriage without contractual limitations." "Yeah, that." Vanessa reached across the table and took his hand. "Are you sure? This is a big decision. You'd be giving up your independence, your separate career, your identity outside of this place. People will say you married into it. They'll call you things. People already call me things. I've been called the billionaire's bargain bride, remember? That ship has sailed." "Ethan, I'm serious." "So am I. I'm not giving up my identity. I'm choosing where to put it. I've spent 10 years building parking garages for Bill Hargrove. I want to spend the next 10 years building something with you." She squeezed his hand. Her eyes were bright, and she blinked twice, fast, the way she did when she was fighting tears. "Okay. Okay. Okay. But I'm still paying you a real salary. A good one. And you're getting an office. I don't need an office. You're getting an office, Ethan, with a door and a desk and a nameplate that says Director of Operations or whatever title you want. Can it say Chief Building Whisperer? Absolutely not. He grinned. She grinned back. And just like that, the last piece of the arrangement fell away, and what was left was simply a marriage, imperfect, unplanned, built on a foundation that no reasonable engineer would have approved, and stronger than either of them had any right to expect. Ethan gave his notice at Hargrove and Associates the following Monday. Bill Hargrove took it with the wounded confusion of a man who couldn't imagine why anyone would leave a job designing strip malls for a position at a luxury resort managed by his own wife. "You're making a mistake, Cole," Bill said, his thick neck reddening above his collar. "Probably," Ethan said, "but it's mine to make." He started at the Belmont full-time the next week, and the transition was smoother than he'd expected, partly because he already knew the property's systems intimately, and partly because the staff, who had watched him crawl through electrical tunnels and repair sabotaged wiring and stand beside Vanessa through every crisis of the past months, accepted him without the skepticism he'd feared. Ray Dawson shook his hand on the first day and said, "About time." Gloria Chen handed him a 3-ring binder of maintenance issues she'd been compiling for years and said, "Fix these and I'll buy you lunch." The kitchen staff started saving him a plate at dinner. He was home. Not in the way he'd been home in his apartment in Macon, surrounded by familiar walls and comfortable routines, but in a deeper way. Home in the sense of belonging, of purpose, of waking up in the morning and knowing exactly why you were getting out of bed and who you were getting out of bed for. The spring brought Marcus Webb's plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy in exchange for the remaining charges being dropped. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in a minimum security facility plus restitution and 5 years of probation. His business holdings were liquidated to pay legal debts and penalties, and the empire he'd spent years building, an empire funded, as the forensic investigation revealed, largely by the same manipulative tactics he'd used against Vanessa, collapsed in a matter of weeks. Vanessa did not attend the sentencing. She spent that morning at the Belmont, walking the grounds with Ethan and Lily, pointing out the new plantings in the garden and the progress on the lakeside cabin renovations. She didn't mention Marcus. She didn't check her phone. When David Reeves texted her the outcome later that afternoon, she read it once, set the phone down, and said, "Okay." Then she went back to reviewing the plans for the new spa expansion. Ethan understood. Closure, he was learning, didn't always look the way you expected. Sometimes it wasn't a dramatic moment or a cathartic speech or a final confrontation. Sometimes it was just a woman reading a text message, saying okay, and choosing to move forward. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do with the past was leave it where it was. The year turned. Seasons changed. Lily turned 8, then 9, and the fierce little girl who'd once colored dogs blue on the living room floor became a fierce young girl who helped Vanessa plan events, bossed the kitchen staff around with cheerful authority, and once told a travel journalist that the Belmont was the best hotel in the world and also my house, so please be careful with the furniture. Vanessa legally adopted her. The paperwork was straightforward. Sarah's parental rights had been voluntarily relinquished years ago, and no legal obstacles remained. But the emotional weight of the decision was immense. Lily chose the date, chose the courthouse, and chose to wear the same yellow dress with the sunflowers that she'd worn to the first wedding, even though it was now 2 sizes too small and had to be let out at the seams by a very patient tailor. In the judge's chambers, when the adoption was finalized, Lily looked up at Vanessa and said, "Now it's official." Vanessa said, "It's been official for a long time, Bug." And Lily said, "I know, but now the paper matches." Ethan watched from his chair, and he thought about structures, about the difference between a building's blueprint and its reality, between the plans you draw and the thing you actually build. The blueprint for his life had been simple: single father, structural engineer, small apartment, quiet existence. The building that actually rose from those plans was something entirely different, bigger, stranger, more beautiful, and far less predictable than anything he could have designed. That was the thing about life, he thought. You could plan it down to the last rivet, and it would still surprise you. The best things he'd ever experienced: Lily, Vanessa, the Belmont, the family they'd built from the wreckage of two lonely lives. None of them had been in the plan. They'd happened because he'd said yes to something that made no sense, because he'd walked into a diner on a rainy night and recognized a woman he barely knew because he'd made a joke about marriage and she'd taken it seriously. And because, on some level, he still didn't fully understand, he'd been willing to be changed by it. It was a warm evening in October, almost exactly 1 year after the courthouse wedding, when Ethan told Vanessa he needed to run an errand. "What kind of errand?" she asked, suspicious. Vanessa was always suspicious of vague statements. It was one of her less charming qualities, and one of the reasons she was good at business. "A quick one. I need to pick something up." "Pick what up?" "Vanessa." "Fine. Be mysterious. See if I care." He drove to Rosie's diner. The neon sign was still flickering. It had been flickering since before he was born, and would probably keep flickering long after he was gone. He parked in the same spot he'd parked on that rainy night, walked inside, and sat in the same booth near the back. Darlene, who still hadn't smiled at him, brought coffee without being asked. "You look different," she said. "Good different or bad different?" "Less pathetic." "Thanks, Darlene." "That wasn't a compliment." "I know." He drank his coffee and waited. 20 minutes later, the door opened and Vanessa walked in. Not soaking wet this time, not red-eyed, not wearing a coat that cost more than his truck. She was wearing jeans and a sweater and the Georgia Tech sweatpants shoes she'd started wearing on evenings off, and she looked around the diner with the expression of someone walking into a memory. "You said to meet you here," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "What's going on?" "Order coffee first." "Ethan." "Coffee first." She ordered coffee. Darlene brought it with the same lack of ceremony she'd brought everything else in the 30-odd years she'd been working there. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Not a jeweler's box. A simple wooden box, handmade, with a slightly uneven lid and a hinge that stuck. He'd made it himself in the Belmont's maintenance workshop over the past 2 weeks, staying late after Lily went to bed, sanding and staining and cursing under his breath when the measurements came out wrong. He set it on the table between them. Vanessa looked at the box. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the box again. "Open it," he said. She opened it. Inside was a ring. Not a diamond, not a gemstone, not anything a billionaire would expect from a jewelry counter. It was a band made from a piece of copper pipe that Ethan had salvaged from the Belmont's original plumbing that predated the renovation, that had been installed when the building was first constructed in 1892, that had survived 130 years of use and neglect and restoration. He'd shaped it on a mandrel, polished it by hand, and lined the inside with a thin band of silver so it wouldn't turn her finger green. "It's not a diamond," he said. "It's not worth anything on the market. It's a piece of the building your father left you. The original building, before you rebuilt it, before the resort, before any of this. I pulled it from the wall during the bathroom renovation last month. It's been there since the beginning." Vanessa stared at the ring. Her lips were pressed together, and her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was fighting to maintain control, blinking rapidly, focusing on a fixed point, breathing through her nose. "I'm not proposing because of a contract," Ethan said. "I'm not proposing to help your credit score or satisfy a bank officer or protect your empire. I'm proposing because 1 year ago, I sat in this booth feeling like the loneliest person alive, and a woman walked in out of the rain who was even lonelier than I was, and somehow, through stubbornness and bad grilled cheese and a 7-year-old with strong opinions about pancakes, we built something real, something I never planned for and can't imagine living without." "Ethan, let me finish. I know I'm not what you expected. I know I'm not what the magazines would pick for you. I drive a truck that still stalls in the rain, I make terrible puns, and I will never, ever learn to cook grilled cheese properly. But I love you. Not the billionaire, not the brand. You. The woman in the sweatpants who colors with my kid and cries in the kitchen and fights like hell for everything she has. I love that woman, and I'm asking her, not the CEO, not the public figure, just her, if she'll marry me. For real this time. Because she wants to. Not because she has to." Vanessa sat across from him in a vinyl booth in a roadside diner that smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, with a ring made from old plumbing in a hand-carved box between them. And she did something Ethan had never seen her do in a business setting, a legal meeting, a press conference, or any other arena where Vanessa Sterling performed the role the world expected of her. She completely fell apart. The tears came fast and hard, and she didn't fight them. She pressed one hand over her mouth and reached for the ring with the other. And when she slid it onto her finger, a perfect fit, because Ethan had measured her ring size by borrowing a ring from her jewelry box while she slept, which was either romantic or creepy, depending on who you asked, she laughed through the tears and said, "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. It's a piece of pipe. I know what it is. That's why it's beautiful." Is that a yes? Ethan Cole, you ridiculous, stubborn, grilled cheese-burning man, of course it's a yes. Darlene appeared at the edge of the booth with the coffee pot, took one look at the scene, and said, "About time." Then she refilled their cups and shuffled away, and Ethan would have sworn, though he could never prove it, that she almost smiled. They renewed their vows on a Saturday afternoon in December in the Belmont's Grand Ballroom, beneath the chandeliers that had survived a sabotage attempt in 100 years of history. It was not a large event. Vanessa had spent enough of her life performing for audiences. They invited only the people who mattered, Helen Cole, who wore a blue dress and cried openly and without apology. Gloria Chen, who served as Vanessa's maid of honor and gave a toast that was equal parts sarcasm and genuine emotion. David Reeves, who attended as a friend for the first time rather than as legal counsel. Patricia Langford, who took one look at the decorations and said, "I would have done them differently," which was the closest she came to sentimentality. Ray Dawson and the maintenance team, who had strung lights across the garden with an attention to detail that would have impressed a professional event planner, and the kitchen staff, who prepared a meal so elaborate that Lily proclaimed it almost as good as chocolate chip pancakes. Lily was the flower girl again, and this time she wore a new dress, white, with small blue flowers, and carried real flowers instead of parking lot dandelions. She walked down the aisle with the solemn concentration of a child who understood, in the way that children understand important things, that this time was different. The ceremony was performed by a county judge, a different one than the first time, a younger woman with kind eyes who took her time with the words and meant them. There were no prenuptial agreements, no dissolution clauses, no financial terms, just two people standing in front of the people they loved, saying the simplest thing two people can say to each other: "I choose you, not because I have to, because I want to, because you are difficult and imperfect and stubborn and scared, and so am I, and somehow that's enough." When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan didn't hesitate this time. He kissed Vanessa in front of everyone, his mother, their friends, their staff, their daughter. And it was not clumsy, and it was not off-center, and their noses did not bump. It was the kiss of a man who had learned over the course of a year exactly how to reach the woman he loved. Vanessa pulled back and whispered, "That was better than the first time." "Practice," he said. "Lots of practice." "I'm an engineer. We iterate." She laughed, and the sound filled the ballroom, and Lily ran up between them and grabbed both their hands, and the three of them stood there in the golden light of a 130-year-old chandelier, a family that had been assembled from spare parts and held together by the kind of love that isn't elegant or efficient or planned, the kind that stumbles in out of the rain, burns the grilled cheese, makes terrible jokes, and somehow, against all odds, holds. The reception lasted until midnight. Helen Cole danced with Ethan to a song he didn't recognize, and when he asked her what it was, she said, "It's the song your father and I danced to at our wedding." Ethan held his mother a little tighter and said nothing, because some things are too big for words, and the only right response is silence and presence. Gloria danced with Ray Dawson, and everyone pretended not to notice. Patricia Langford drank 2 glasses of champagne, told a joke that made the entire table laugh, and then excused herself early, claiming she had emails to send, which everyone knew was a lie. Lily fell asleep on the ballroom floor at 11:30, curled up on a pile of napkins, her flower girl dress crumpled and her shoes 3 feet away. Ethan carried her upstairs the same way he'd carried her 1,000 times before, her head on his shoulder, her small body warm and heavy with sleep, her breath slow and steady against his neck. Vanessa walked beside him, holding the wooden box with the copper ring, her bare feet silent on the hardwood stairs. They put Lily to bed together, tucked the blanket under her chin the way she liked, turned on the nightlight, a small lamp shaped like a star that she'd picked out herself at a store in Macon, stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at their daughter, because that's what she was now, theirs, fully and officially and in every way that counted. Then they walked out to the balcony, the same balcony where they'd stood on one of their first nights together, when the marriage was still a contract and the future was still uncertain, and neither of them had any idea what they were walking into. The lake was silver in the moonlight, the air smelled like pine and the faint sweetness of the last autumn leaves. The frogs were singing their broken spring songs, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of the reception's last song drifted up from the ballroom below, something slow and warm that Ethan didn't recognize, but that felt exactly right. "Hey," Vanessa said. "Hey? We did it." "Which part?" "All of it. The wedding, the resort, the sabotage, Marcus, the media, the adoption, the gala, the grilled cheese." She leaned against him. "All of it." "Yeah, we did. Was it worth it?" Ethan thought about the rainy night at Rosie's diner, about the woman with the red-rimmed eyes who sat at the counter and ordered black coffee, about the prenuptial agreement he'd read at his kitchen table, the courthouse wedding, the dandelion bouquet, the first burnt grilled cheese, the first real laugh, the 14 hours in the electrical tunnel, the speech at the gala, the morning in the kitchen when Lily said "Mom" for the first time. He thought about all the moments that had led to this one, the planned moments and the unplanned ones, the terrible ones and the perfect ones, the ones that made no sense and the ones that made all the sense in the world. "Every minute," he said. Vanessa put her head on his shoulder and they stood together on the balcony of the building her father had left her. The building she'd rebuilt with her own hands, the building Ethan had crawled through and repaired and learned to love. And they looked out at the lake and the moonlight and the life they'd built together. Not the life they'd planned, the one they'd earned. There's a thing that happens when two people who've been broken find each other at the exact right moment. It's not magic, it's not destiny, it's something much more ordinary and much more difficult. It's the decision, made every single day, to stay, to keep showing up, to keep making the pancakes and fixing the wiring and fighting the fights and sitting on the couch at 2 a.m. when the world is falling apart. Love isn't a feeling, it's a verb. It's the act of choosing someone, not once, but 1,000 times, in 1,000 small ways, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Ethan Cole and Vanessa Sterling didn't fall in love the way people do in stories. They stumbled into it sideways, through a fake marriage and a legal crisis, and a 7-year-old's unwavering belief that chocolate chip pancakes could fix anything. They built their love the way Ethan built buildings, one piece at a time, with strong foundations and imperfect materials and the stubborn conviction that the structure would hold. And it held. Not because it was perfect, not because they were perfect, but because they decided together that it was worth holding on to. And that in the end is the only thing that matters.